faster than a speeding bullet,
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
more powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus, resilient, highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Hey guys, Jared Moon here, and welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. Today, we have Dr. Bhrett McCabe from the Mindside. He runs a website and company called the Mindside. You can check them out at themindside.com, but he is a sports and performance psychologist, and he's a licensed clinical psychologist. He has a lot of interesting work. We talk about all that in the podcast, but I love talking to sports and performance psychologists because that's something that I really think is missing. People, and I would say not necessarily in coaching, but in athletes. Athletes don't focus enough on the mental side of training, and that's why I try to bring this to you guys, these kind of interviews, where we really get that well-rounded, better human picture. We got the training, we got the mindset, and we're really taking care of the human being as a whole. And so definitely listen to Dr. Bhrett McCabe. We have a very interesting conversation that spans talking about veterans, sports and performance psychology. He talks about we go on a few tangents here and there, but it was a really fun interview, so definitely check this one out if you're into the psychology of sports and human performance. And also, I'll say before we start, go over to into3fitness.com, sign up for the newsletter, guys. You get a ton of free stuff. You're going to get 7 days of training with our Barbell Indoc program, and then you're also going to get invitation to our training, and you're going to get hooked up with all sorts of different things that come with being a part of our newsletter, like 5-Line Fridays, new articles, updated articles. A lot of stuff is going on behind the scenes at Into3 Fitness that most people don't know about if you're not signed up for the newsletter. So go sign up, guys. It's not one of those boring, like, oh, here's a recap of the last week. We try to really provide as much value to you as possible. So go sign up, and we will hook you up with a bunch of cool stuff. But let's dig into this podcast with Dr. Bhrett McCabe. All right, Bhrett, thank you so much for coming on the Better Humanology podcast. I'm super pumped to be talking with you today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, I'd like to start off right away, giving our listeners some sort of challenge for their week and get them going. So if you could help me out and provide, we're going to do a physical fitness challenge or a physical challenge, any sort of physical challenge, a mental toughness challenge, and then a book recommendation. So we'll start with the physical challenge if you have one for the listeners today.
Yeah, so this is a simple physical challenge, but it's really hard. And the reason it's hard is whenever we're doing something physically that requires us to give everything we have, normal humans hold back. And so if we said we're going to do 12 100-meter dashes, okay, you actually don't give your full effort on the first, second, third, or fourth. You actually give your full effort on what you have on your 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. Early in that period, you're holding back to make sure you don't run out of gas. So the biggest fear that most humans have in training is that they're going to run out of gas and they're going to have nothing to give at the end. But that's the problem, because what you're doing is you're training yourself to conserve energy versus training yourself to execute and to expend energy. The only way we're going to grow our tank and our capacity is to extend what we have. So what I want you to do is I want you to go out with the idea of let's do 1,200 meter dashes. Okay, not very hard, not very taxing, but instead of coasting in the first hundreds or the first whatever, let's empty the tank on every single one of them. But here's your rule that you get. If you get to a spot where you have nothing else to give and you are fully gassed, you can stop at any time. You don't have to continue. I don't want you to get into the mindset of only giving a little bit with the hope that you have something more to give later. That's a challenge. That's a mistake. And I see it with pro athletes. I see it with elite training athletes. I even see it with college strength and conditioning teams. So let's do the physical challenge this week that we're going to empty the tank on every sprint that we give. And let's give as many as we can, up to 12.
I love that challenge, and it brings me back when most of my training of athletes now I do online, but when I was doing a lot of it in person, that added element I had was being there, me knowing what we're doing that day, but not ever fully letting the athlete know, and trying to work what you're saying in, like, hey, we're just going to do 2, not necessarily lying to them, but, watching their effort, and if their effort's 100%, then we would end it early, or we would keep going, not as a punishment, just to see them, really empty the tank. I love that. I think that's amazing advice.
Well, and real quick, just to expand on it, I had an athlete I was working with a Division I basketball team. Kid was very talented, but he was overweight. And he wasn't overweight by general standards, but for fitness levels, he had low fitness for what he needed to do on the basketball court to be a kid that could play 38 minutes a game. And I was watching him do sprints and I was watching him do lines, and he was never gassed early. And then he would empty. And so we got into this long conversation, and he said when he was in high school, he would run out of gas so fast but coach would continue to make him go, which to me is the problem. If you're out of gas and you're legitimately out of gas, you don't need to continue to go.
Right.
So what I'd rather do as a coach say, look, you're done. You did 6 and you did 6 flawlessly well. You're empty. Tomorrow we're going to try to do 7 and 8. It's an amazing drill. And what you can actually see is a little bit of a blend of mental toughness, but I've got another challenge for you on that.
All right, let's hop into that one. How about a mental toughness challenge?
So this one's a little bit different. Instead of challenging our mind on the training field or in the gym or on the treadmill, I want to pull back a little bit. One of the things that we never do is we never take inventory of ourselves. And it's tough. And the reason it's called a mental toughness is we can tell everybody what everyone else needs to do in their life to improve. All we can ever see are the negatives we have in our own lives. And so it's what I call the mountain of belief and the cloud of doubt. And it's based in my book. But it's the fact that doubts are normal. And they're like fears, okay? Doubts, if doubts didn't have some truth to them, they wouldn't stick, right? So they got to have a little bit of truth to them, a little bit of fear associated with them. But the problem with doubts is they recruit their friends. They're like bad friends that show up at a party. They just recruit more and more people there. And under high pressure scenarios or high intensity or low mood states or frustrating times in our lives, they just recruit more and more. And what happens is we see doubts as the standard of care. We go, oh, why would I ever believe in myself? So what I want you to do is I want you to take a piece of paper out, and on one side I want you to write beliefs, and on the other side I want you to write doubts. And I want you to take about 30 minutes, and I call it red wine therapy or coffee therapy. Go pour yourself a glass of red wine or go pour yourself a cup of coffee and sit there with music in your ears and just allow the mind to expand. And I want you to write down every doubt you have about yourself and in your training and in your performance. Everything you can, write them down. On the other side of the paper, now we do the negative one first because it's easier. On the other side, I want you to write down everything that you believe about yourself and everything that in that moment, why you, okay? And that's on the other side of the page. Now, what I want you to do with that is after you've completed, I want you to look in the doubts and I want you to put them into 3 different buckets. So bucket 1 may be personal doubt about my overall ability. Number 2 doubt may be about my fitness, and number 3 may be about my ability to socially connect to others. I want you to circle them and number them. So that way you see all those doubts you have are usually coming from 2 or 3 themes. And then I want you to understand which side you're going to invest in. Are you going to invest in squashing doubts? Are you going to invest in growing beliefs? The only way we can be successful is to squash our doubts with our beliefs. But when we don't do it and we don't write things down, we become mentally weak to those doubts and we become susceptible to the power that they have. You've got to understand why you believe in yourself and how you're going to grow. I have a formula in my office. It's beliefs squared over doubts. That's the only way to have success.
That's a really powerful exercise, and I will definitely tackle that on. And I encourage all the listeners to definitely do that this week. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely. That's really awesome. All right. Now, how about a book recommendation?
So a book that is a little bit off the beaten path, a little bit, not by the author standpoint, but from the content. So I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell. I think he does an amazing job in human psychology. He actually won an award by the American Psychological Association several years ago. As a clinical psychologist, I always see that and I go, okay, interesting. So I've read his Outliers and all, his other books. But the one that people don't normally read is a book called What the Dog Saw. What the Dog Saw is a culmination and a collection of all of his New Yorker articles. And in those articles, he has like essays. And one of them is, why is there really only 1 or 2 brands, but a lot of brands of mustard? Because the formula for ketchup has to be so good, so perfect. Any kind of imperfection, the palate can't take it. But in mustard, you can have a whole bunch of different varieties. They've tried different varieties of ketchup. It doesn't work. We're standards. So are we like ketchup or are we like mustard? So What the Dog Saw, great book. The other reason I like it is it's a book that I can read chapters and not pick it back up for 2 months. and not miss anything because they're all they're all in a vacuum.
Gotcha. That's awesome. All right, I'm definitely going to check that book out. Well, I appreciate you giving the book recommendation and the challenges there. I think that's the really powerful, and I'd like to tackle both of them on. I think they both hit on a lot deeper level than we typically get on the podcast. So I appreciate you bringing the heat this morning. And let's go ahead and give the listeners a background of who you are. Maybe you talk about what you're doing today and how you got there.
Yeah, so I'm a sports and performance psychologist based in Birmingham, Alabama. I own a company called the Mindside, and the reason of the Mindside is we believe in our office that everything begins in the mind. But for me, my journey to this point was what you'd expect, which is I was an athlete in college. I played baseball at LSU. I was on 2 national championship teams. I really struggled to find my success. I really struggled to find my purpose. Had a really difficult time overcoming an injury that, looking back at it, probably shouldn't have been that hard. But for me, it derailed me. And when I finally connected to the mental side of the game and my true potential and what I thought I could get through with, I ended up having a lot of success at LSU. In my last 2 years, I was one of the top pitchers on the team and led in appearances and lowest ERA and all the other stats that we dig with. And then I decided, look, this mind stuff is pretty powerful. So I wanted to become a clinical psychologist. I knew it was a long shot to do it. In clinical psychology programs, particularly in PhD programs, they may get 500 applications and take 10 people. And I decided, you know what, I'm in. I'm doing it. I'm going to figure it out. And they said, well, you can't go to LSU where you did your undergrad because that's a faux pas. I was like, well, I only have one choice. My wife, or my fiance at the time, was in nursing school in Baton Rouge. I'm like, look, I'm going to do this. So I fully committed myself to what it took to get in. I rocked the GREs, made a connection with a professor who had an interest similar to mine, and went after it and got into LSU. The reason I wanted to be a clinical psychologist first was I feel like for us to truly understand human behavior, we have to understand both spectrums. I think when we only understand one side, like if you're in the strength and conditioning world and you've never worked on the rehabilitative side, you don't understand when somebody's at base zero, how to get them into elite form. If all you're ever doing is elite form, then the problem is that's all you ever see. So for me, as human behavior, I wanted to understand people who are struggling with life and at the place of wondering, can they continue to live on another day? Or how do they handle PTSD coming back from wars or being shot at work? And so my specialty was what we call behavioral medicine, which is the integration between psychological and medical factors. So I trained in ICU settings. I trained in settings where medically ill patients, breast cancer, HIV clinics, chronic pain, headache, and knowing that I was always going to come back to athletes. So when I finished my training at LSU, I did my residency at Brown Medical School up in Rhode Island in psychology. We have a 1-year residency. And I got done and I said, I want to be the next big thing, right? That was my dream and my desire, but I wasn't ready. And so we had 2 kids at the time. In fact, as we record this, tomorrow's my youngest daughter's 16th birthday. So she's free and so start driving. And then my wife and I are now free. And so I went to work at Merck Research Labs doing clinical trial research because I wanted to understand what, when you're talking about success and failure, I wanted to know what success and failure was like on a $1 billion product and making decisions and systems. And so I did that for about 14 months, got homesick, wanted to move back to the Southeast, found a great job with another pharmaceutical company working for a product that treated schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and eventually depression, a revolutionary product, and started doing that and did that for about 8 years. And then in the meantime, I started working with individual athletes. People knew I was a psychologist and people knew that I was a former athlete, and they would call me and say, hey, look, can you help my kid out? I mean, can we meet at Starbucks or at the country club? And I'm sure. And then one thing led to another. Then my wife gave me an ultimatum one day and said, you're working a lot. That's great extra cash. And I kept saying, I want to do this full time. But she didn't work. She was a tennis mom and a workout mom. And she said, if you want to do this, then you have to make more money in 1 month doing that than you work at the pharmaceutical industry. And I made a really good living. When you look at the benefits and the car and the home office and my schedule, well, 1 month I did. And it was a month of February. It was 28 months. And in that month, I made more. I worked all 28 days. And I went out. My boss at the pharmaceutical company allowed me to moonlight. And so I built a practice. And it's been 6 years now. And we've now added on additional consultants. We have a team, an office of a lot of folks. And we're just getting started. And my goal is to bring mental coaching, mental training, really the power of the human mind to the mainstream. And it's not about motivational quotes. It's about engagement. It's about people understanding themselves. I told somebody earlier, I said, most people in my field are super, super fit, have a great head of hair, have a tan and great teeth. So I better have great content because I ain't got none of that. And so I try. And one thing has led to another. I now work with about 9 guys on the PGA Tour who are fully statused, all very, very talented. I work with several on the LPGA Tour. The University of Alabama consult with them 1 to 2 days a week. I'm over in their athletic department working with their athletes with all sports. And we're just growing an NBA franchise, NFL clients. And so I absolutely love what I do. And it's exhausting. It's tiring being on the road. But I dig it.
And I'm very, very fascinated with your work. This is something that I'm very interested in. When I was early in my coaching career, and the listeners may have heard me talk about this before, but I was all about the program, putting together the program, sets and reps, and how this was going to work, and trying to develop the best programs possible. But what I was finding out as time goes on, going from going up in my coaching career, realizing how powerful that mental side is. I was like, I got the best program in the world, but if I'm not touching or reaching these people on some sort of psychological level, they're not finishing the program. They're not bringing the intensity that they need to. So that's why I find your work very fascinating. Something I could definitely study.
And can I add something on that? I think you just brought up something very interesting. So my wife and I, about 5 years ago when we opened the business, we decided, all right, it's time for us to really get fit. And, we jumped into the CrossFit phase and kicked butt. I mean, we were killing it. But it was funny to watch the coaches because, like, for me, if you get up on me and you're like, you can do this, go, I'm going to push. I mean, I'll squat the house. As a former baseball player, as a pitcher, they used to not allow us to do upper body stuff. So we just squatted a ton. And I'm 6'5", and my squat partner was 5'9", and he had a distinct advantage over me. But I was like, I'll never get beat when it comes to squatting. Now you yell and scream. Now, if you go to my wife, who's a nurse, who's never been an athlete, and you start yelling and screaming at her, she shuts down.
Right.
And what people don't understand, I'm around some of the world's best coaches at what they do. I get to see them firsthand. I played for a Hall of Fame coach who won 5 national titles in 10 years. And it's amazing to see how he knew how. I get to see a pretty good football coach at University of Alabama. I get to see national championship coach in other sports at that university. There's a bunch of national championship coaches there. I get to see the number one factor of a great coach is they know the person they're coaching better than the person knows themselves. And when I sat down with my coach and he, we went back and I said, Coach, there's a moment I talk about in the book. I'm not going to share it here, but I said, you changed my life. And 20 years later, he knew the date. And he said, the reason is, he said, Bhrett, you got to understand about great coaches is we have to learn what buttons you have to push. Then we have to learn when to push them and how often to push them. And if I push them too soon or too often, I'll lose you. And that's important. So if you're training somebody, get to know them, ask them questions. And I watch Coach Saban on the sidelines. He yells and screams at one player, but what the media doesn't show is that he puts his arm around another and says, you can do this. And that's incredible coaching. See, unfortunately, what a lot of us pull out of that is, I'm going to be in your face and I'm going to get after it. I'm going to be a drill sergeant.
Right.
No, be a coach, be a person. Let's look at the word coach for a minute. It's building up of another. And some people need a foot in their rear end sometimes because they don't believe that they can do it. And other people need encouragement to know that they can. And if you're a great coach, you can figure that out. You're right. The program helps, but the engagement is everything. And if we can engage and you can pull in and connect to another human being, that's what we're on this world to do, is to connect and learn from one another.
I think that's, I'm in full agreement. Learning the to go further, that's what I dove into was the mental side, reading as many books as I could on behavioral psychology, and then also using my time in the military as an officer to realize that as a coach, I'm also a leader, and leader is very much the same. What you were saying is like it's tailored to the individual. You can't. Not everyone is led in the same way. You have to be like I have two boys, and I have to lead my sons very differently. Because they're just very, very different people. So I think that's very, very powerful advice on coaching there. But I want to bring up something that you mentioned when you were talking about your background, and you said that people need to be fully engaged to really, I don't know, what can we say, get to the next level or to really activate the mental side. What do you mean by being fully engaged?
It's a great question. So being fully engaged means I'm ready for the challenge. I'm going to embrace the journey regardless of what happens. And I understand that I'm okay regardless. Now, I'm ready to embrace the challenge, right? I know where I want to go. Those are easy. People say, I want to do that. But as soon as hard things come, people change for one of two reasons. They either have to or they need to. Okay? They have to or need to is one, and then they want to is the other one. Mm-hmm. So let's look about weight loss, right? Which is a big issue in this world. When do people mostly get motivated to change? Either right after a doctor says, hey, look, your levels are high, your HDL's, your LDL, something off, your glucose, you got to really watch it. We're going to have to start doing some medical intervention here. And then all of a sudden they get really motivated. Or their jeans are getting tight and they don't want to go buy new jeans. Okay.
Right.
The other one is they want to. They're going on a trip. They're going to a reunion. But what happens after those change? As soon as they drop. The effort is too much. And I would love for all of us to say it needs to be an absolute passion within us, okay? It's not for everybody. And we used to blame it on willpower. And so we look at people who weren't successful and say, their willpower sucks. Well, it's not willpower. Willpower is not a trait. It's a resource that comes and goes over the course of a day. So if I take me, for example, I had my left hip replaced December 7th. So I'm 90, 100 days out, whatever. It's the greatest thing I ever did. But if I look at that and I say, I need to go exercise and work out, I'm out of therapy, but I need to get stronger and better. Well, if I go into the office at 6:30 and I leave my office at 8 o'clock at night, when am I going to exercise? Right. And I'm working straight. I'm not. I mean, it's unrealistic. Okay. So I used to get really upset at myself. So now I find time on the weekends to do what I can. I try to move more. I try to buy other things in. But willpower is not a trait, okay? So the big thing about that kind of engagement is understanding, do I have the belief in myself to be able to achieve the intermediate goals that I have in my life? It's what we call self-efficacy. Do I believe I can be successful? Now, all people are always, when they have to or they need to, and they want to, self-efficacy is highest before they go into it. But when self-efficacy dips is when they get in the middle of it and there's challenges, distractions, frustrations, disappointments. Now all of a sudden people go, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Like the first 2 or 3 weeks of a new diet and a new health plan, people start feeling better. But what happens on week 6, 7, and 8 when there's no changes? The changes are going on underneath, but on the surface, they don't feel any different. In fact, they may actually feel like they're gaining weight, which is if they wanted to lose weight. Now I know we can argue about whether it's a weight or not, but you get my point. So then all of a sudden they go, I just can't do it anymore. And hell, so now they go blow it. They take a weekend off, which is not a bad thing. Right. But they take a weekend off and now they feel guilty. So when the struggle hits, can they stick with it? And ultimately, if they succeed or fail, are they okay? Because we do everything in our life to prevent negative outcomes. Very few of us ever do anything to achieve because we want to achieve. The motor pathways are different between prevention and purpose. All right. So we have anxiety and adrenaline feel just the same in the human body, identical. But when we cognitively or emotionally interpret that as one as threat, it moves a motor system to preventative actions. But if we see it as engagement, we become very much so goal direct. We move much more in a dopamine pathway versus more of a preventative pathway, stress prevention, which tends to release more cortisol. So it's the same thing. Engagement is, why am I doing it? What am I getting after? Why am I fighting for this? It's because I want to, not because I have to. That doc, if you go in that next visit and the doc says, great job. You're going to relax. I can guarantee you what you're going to do. You're going to go get nachos because you don't have to see him again for 6 months.
Right.
But that's fine. I'd rather you say, I'm going to have a celebratory meal. And then I get back after it tomorrow. Go for it. But just be engaged.
And I wonder if, does that bring back to, you mentioned earlier in the mental toughness challenge, beliefs and doubts. Is that a big proponent of how you see people moving forward? Is fixing that belief pattern first to be fully engaged?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. And one of the things that we do is we magnify our doubts and our fears and our insecurities, and we minimize our strengths, our beliefs, and our assets. And the reason for it is the human mind's not built to be content. It's not built to be happy. And it's also not built to have a repetitive motor pattern. It's built for variability and adjustment. Okay, so when we're trying to put everything into a box to make us feel good, if we were content, we wouldn't grow.
Right.
I mean, if we looked at our bank account and said, I got $10,000 in there, I'm good. Well, you wouldn't grow it. I've never met a content millionaire. They always want 2. Then they got 2, they want 5. They get 5, they want 10. Now they want 10, they want 50. Okay, that's a normal drive within us. But if the motivation is to fix something, to correct something, to buying a house because you're low self-esteem, you're just going to get in a worse position. If you do it because it's what you desire to do and what you want to do, and it's like, I'm going to get after this. That's why the book is called the Mindside Manifesto. You got to have a belief so strongly in your mindset about what you want that it rises up to a level of a manifesto. Like, I am willing to declare this is what I want. And if you can't do that, why in the hell are you engaging in it? You'll drop out of anything you try if you're not fully convicted to it.
Now, I want to talk about the book a little bit more. So it's called the Mindside Manifesto. And what was your big reason? What was the purpose in writing the book?
I've been kicking around a couple books for a while. In this field, it pretty much, my knock on my field in the mental training field is hurry up and publish a book before you have clients so you look like an expert. I don't mean to make a dig at anybody, but that's pretty common. And so all of a sudden now I have a book and the bios are all the same. Works with elite professional athletes, a highly requested person. Okay, it's the same bio written by everybody. I didn't feel like I really knew what was moving people. And so I sat on it for a while, and I keep a notebook with me, and I'd take notes during all my sessions, and I would write down key factors and components. And I started writing the book, and I've had a theme in my life that I always needed somebody to do it with me. And so I always hesitated writing because I was afraid that I was going to forget something, overdo something, not cite something. It was a fear-based model, right? That I was going to get myself into some sort of problem. And I wouldn't be able to tie it together. So I delayed. And I've got several books on my hard drive that are probably 60% done. But I finally got to a spot where in my office we put a line in the sand and said, Bhrett, for this business, you've got to have a book. But I was like, what am I going to write it on? So I called a guy, and here's my theme. I called a guy that covered me when I played ball at LSU, and I said, hey, would you be interested in co-authoring a book? And he's like, sure, I'll do it. I said, I want a ghostwriter that will just take what I do. We can sit down. I do better when I have free flow of thoughts, and I'll write it all out. And he's like, okay. So I kept sending him stuff. And he's like, really, really good. I'll get on it next week. Really, really good. I'll get on it after the Olympics. Really, really good. And he never got me anything. And I finally I called him the day after my birthday. I called him and I said, dude, I can't do this. I'm out. I said, I have 8 weeks to get this turned in. And I have nothing for me. It'll get done. I said, I can't do it. I said, this is a lesson in my life. I've got to stand on my own. So I started getting up at 4 o'clock and would work from 4:30 to 8 at a Starbucks or a local coffee shop. And then I'd go into my office at 8 and see clients till 6:30. And then I'd repeat and rinse for the next 6 weeks. And when I was on the road, I took days off, but I would read reviews and drafts. And how I started it was I started thinking, I was like, what do the best of the best do? And what do the people who are struggling not do? And I started thinking, well, it's things like focus. I didn't want to write another book that had plan and purpose. That wasn't interesting to me. Like, do a plan. Okay, great. Have a process. Fine. Okay. I wanted to get into the psychology of people. So I started building out the mountain of belief, the cloud of doubt. I started believing out how's focus, what I call the game plan, the cognitive map, which it all begins with self-belief and it builds out from there. And I started writing all these things down, and I started looking at it, I'm like, damn, I'm writing my own story. I'm not really writing a story about other people. I'm writing my story. So I added the bio in the beginning of why me, which was why was I challenged the way I was on the mound when I was in March of 1994 as a guy who was always good but never great. I was always good enough but never elite. And yet I pitched at LSU and pitched at, one of the best places in the country to play. But I never embodied myself as this guy who mentally was strong. My dad was retired Air Force lieutenant colonel, and I saw pride of military, but I didn't really ever think like I wouldn't have been a good military person because I didn't believe I could have succeeded. I was always an avoider. I would approach and then kind of back off. So I started writing my own book, and then I went, wait a minute here. What we're also talking about is the day my life changed is the day I finally declared a manifesto in my own life that I was going to go for everything that stood in front of me, that I wasn't going to wait for somebody to do it for me. And here I was repeating that exact same pattern with my book. So that's why I took it over myself, and I sat down and I wrote it, and it's amazing when the light comes on, the theme and the thread that is woven. And it's been amazing. The sales have been way exceeded my expectations. And I don't even think we've moved outside of the golf and the golf genre. And it's not a golf book. It's a book for anybody who's training anyone or any athlete or any parent or anybody in a competitive environment. But because of my connections in golf, that's where it started, and it has gone gangbusters. And it's now getting in the hands of strength and conditioning coaches and head coaches. And that's why I wrote it, was I want people to understand that the power of their mind, what they believe in themselves, is the key to success.
And belief is something that's really hard to change. How do you recommend that people do that?
If we're looking for an immediate overnight shift in belief, yeah, it's hard to change. But belief starts with one thing we can believe in. See, belief is a cycle. All right. And let me take you, the listeners, through this. Belief is our end goal. And once we have self-belief, we're pretty powerful. But confidence leads to belief, right? Confidence is knowing that you're capable, self-efficacy, knowing that you can do things when it matters, okay? And there's levels of confidence. I can do it at home when there's no pressure. I can believe in that. Then I can do it in the final minute of a ball game. That's a whole different level of confidence. So there's a progression of confidence that must occur. So confidence leads to belief. And once I have belief, I believe I can be there any given day. But trust leads to confidence. Trust is knowing that the individual pieces are consistent and predictable. If I do this, then this will happen. Trust leads to confidence, which leads to belief. But what leads to trust? Now, trust, what leads to that is a preparation plan, a consistent plan. Now, if our plan is to fix problems, we don't build trust, we just fix problems. If our plan is to build greatness, to master something, then we start building trust in individual components. But it starts with one thing. And what leads to a plan, which is a vision, okay? And that all cycles together. So belief is our end goal, but it doesn't start with 10 things. It starts with one thing. So as an athlete, we used to call it at LSU graduation. When you could do certain things on the field, you graduated, which meant now you could work through any problem that you were in. So let's go back to your military days. They didn't take a young officer and put him out in charge of a group who had high risk. They put you in a low-risk situation to show that you can succeed in those levels. If we take an airline pilot, we don't put him up in the air and say all engines are dead. They put him in, they train him over and over and over again on how the engines work. Then they take him up and they fly with experienced pilots and they learn firsthand. Then they put him into simulators, thousands and thousands of hours in simulators, messing with them in every way possible. But belief is knowing that when they get up in the air at 30,000 feet and there's an issue, that they can land the plane regardless, that they trust their training in the individual. They trust that when they push the flaps, the plane does this, that they're confident to know that if the flaps don't work, do they have something else I can go to? And ultimately, it's the belief in themselves. Now, belief sometimes hurts us, right? Sometimes we're arrogant believing that we think we can do more than we possibly can. And that's why it's a cycle that has to continue.
I think that's really great. And I want to jump back to something else you mentioned in your background. You said that you were a clinical psychologist first because you wanted to understand people kind of at the lowest level, starting from zero versus the elite. And I want to know if there's any contrast or maybe one thing that you picked out of that, maybe, and I don't want to tie down any specific thing, but maybe just the difference in what you saw in helping someone, I guess, who's at like ground zero versus helping someone who's at elite, and saying they're both wanting to get to the next level. Are you working on similar things with these two people at different levels, or is it completely different techniques and strategies?
No, it's a lot of the same techniques and strategies. The first thing is, in either way, if I sit down with somebody who's clinically depressed and has a high level of anhedonia, which is a core trait of depression, which is lack of interest or lack of initiation on things. Why is that happening? It could be biological. In fact, that the biological underpinnings of depression are zapping them. But at the same time, too, if I say, hey, look, I want to do this, this, and this, and then they come back next week and they haven't done any of it, the easy thing to do as a psychologist is to go, you're not doing anything I'm telling you to do, and get frustrated at them. But a really good coach, a really good leader, a really good practitioner says, okay, look, these barriers that are in your life, why are we not engaging them? What is it deeper? I'm not judging. Okay, I want to know. And it's amazing when you uncover something and you strip away and you clean off, or sometimes they just lack the skill sets. See, to me, when I'm working with somebody, it's always, am I learning, am I teaching them a skill, or am I stripping away too many skills? Some people just don't have the skill sets, right? If I ask somebody to do deep breathing and they go out of their mouth, they've been doing that their whole life and they think that's traditional breathing. They have no idea. And so for somebody who's really depressed or really anxious, is giving them some tools. But we see those barriers and we all of a sudden sometimes, unfortunately, make a qualitative decision about that person. But if I'm working with an athlete who, let's say, is number 20 in the world, do they all want to get to number 1 in the world?
Probably not.
No. And we assume that when somebody comes in, because a lot of times what we're doing is we're transferring our own beliefs and our own abilities and our own confidence onto them. And so that transference is dangerous, and that counter-transference. It's always good to say, like I had a golfer one time tell me, I said, what's your goals? I want to be number 70 in the world. Now, if somebody was sitting at 150 and said, I want to get to 70, I'd say, okay, good intermediate goal. I'm not a big goal person. I just kind of know what people want. And this person said, I said, why? He said, well, it's because I'm always going to very conservatively keep my card. I can enjoy the lifestyle I have without having to sacrifice a whole lot. That was interesting because I look at this athlete's talent and I go, you could be top 20 in the world. They didn't want it. They really did. And you know what? They're struggling. They still are today because the sacrifice is the biggest thing. So when we see those barriers, whether it's number 1 in the world or somebody who's really struggling with life, and by the way, those who are number 1 in the world also struggle with life. I think we can't forget that. Is that we all are living this world on a rock spinning the sun, going very fast with a lot of interaction, with a lot of issues in this world. And it's our ability to learn from that interaction of this world about ourselves. We got to understand that interaction better than anything else. And once we tear that apart and we find it, it's amazing. It's amazing. I've watched people who have faced breast cancer with double mastectomies like it's nothing. But then when their cell phone doesn't come on, they melt down.
Right.
And I've also seen people who say, I shouldn't be this nervous about an event because I know there's somebody in my life who's got end-stage pancreatic cancer. And I'm like, don't ever compare, because we never know the true strength of us until we're faced and forced to become strong. And each of those individual challenges, just learn about yourself. Don't judge. And so I think your question is, a lot of times we make those judgments because we doubt who we are. So, I want us to understand that we're all humans. Where we choose to apply our craft is just where we choose to apply our craft.
All right, I'm going to switch gears on you here and say there's a nationwide curriculum implemented, and the president calls you up and he says you're responsible for one chapter of this book, and every single child in America will have to read your chapter and be tested on and pass before they're allowed to graduate high school and pursue further education. What would your chapter be about?
The devastating impact of mental health stigma. So let me describe. So if we wore red every day for depression, we'd wear red, like we do for heart disease. We'd wear red every freaking day. Depression increases the mortality and morbidity risk of just about every medical condition. And yet, what do? We marginalize it. If somebody's down, we don't know what to do with them. We kind of make fun of them. One of the things that ticked me off the most was I was standing in line in a supermarket one day, and they had these, the news magazines or crap magazines, Star and People. And this was a time, being from South Louisiana, you always keep up with Britney Spears because she's from around that area. And, we have a lot of other really famous stars that come from South Louisiana, but, you still pay attention to them. And, here they were making fun of her when she was going through her bad time, lost her mind, all this other crap. Okay. Very judgmental, very ignorant. And on the exact next page, they had this guy from Grey's Anatomy on the front cover of People magazine. And my harrowing journey with skin cancer. And the article was written so different. I'm not minimizing skin cancer. I'm sure it was scary. And I know people who've died from melanomas and things like that. Okay. But I also know people who've died from bipolar disorder, depression, and panic disorder, and have lost their lives due to addiction. And we marginalize that. And the reason we marginalize it all is because we don't understand the underlying aspect of human emotion and the interaction with this world. So when we see something we don't understand, all we do as a society is we marginalize it instead of trying to understand them. And what if I would want every kid going through school right now to understand is that human emotion experience is what makes you normal. The abnormal, putting those in air quotes, those abnormal feelings that you have are not necessarily abnormal. They're just unique to you, or maybe they're uncomfortable to you. But instead of going to your parents and parents saying, just pull yourself up and get you out of this hole, say, okay, have a conversation and say, when you feel that way, honey, I felt this way my entire life too. And I'm okay. And if it gets to a certain spot, it's kind of like having, gastric reflux. If it gets to a spot that it's bothering you and it's hurting, we'll go to the doctor. But I'm going to go to somebody who knows what the hell they're doing versus somebody who's going to marginalize us and make us feel uncomfortable. I think it's a shame what we do with mental health stigma. We call people retarded. And I'm not saying we need to be snowflakes, okay? And I'm not saying that we need to, look, we all need to toughen up in this world and stop this whole PC stuff, okay? Life is not about holding us with kid gloves and wrapping in bubble wrap. We need to harden up because, back in the olden days, they used to walk essentially barefoot. What happened? Their feet got firm on the bottom and they could handle rough terrain. We got to firm up. But we don't firm people up by denigrating them because of their mental health struggles. Anxiety, depression, addiction, they're equal opportunity offenders. All right. In today's world, we have an addiction problem. Well, an addiction problem because something's missing deep down. Okay. We need to get to the root of it. And for these youth to grow in an ever demanding and stressful world, the better we can get them to understand their human emotion. Look, the Disney movie Inside Out, incredible because they're attacking it. We got to do a better job of that. I know that's off tangent, but you asked.
No, I think it's great, and that's actually a line that it was actually. I realized that I hadn't drawn a line in the sand until a few years ago. I had a reader reach out to me, and he was going through some really tough stuff in his life, and he was just saying, he's like, "You're always talking about mental toughness and being tough," and he's like, I can't pull it together. I know I just need to suck it up and deal with it. And I was like, whoa, dude, like what you're going through and what I'm talking about are totally different. I'm telling people to, if you're sprinting that next 50 yards, I want you to get that intestinal fortitude and mental grit to push yourself to go at that 100% for the next 50 yards. And hopefully that mental toughness will then somewhat translate into your everyday life. But I'm not the guy on the sidelines who sees someone going through something that's really tough emotionally, or psychologically, and being like, dude, just suck it up and get through it. I think that I 100% agree with what you're saying. There should be no stigma in getting help for a problem that you may have, or even having a problem in general.
Well, and let's take a look at the military. My dad passed away 6 years ago. And he passed away due to some medical complications from some exposure that he got during Vietnam. He was a C-130 navigator. They threw a lot of junk. He did several tours over there. He loved it. He was pro-military 100%. I mean, he in fact, on my wall right next to me, I've got pictures of his C-130s and his patches, and a member of the Blind Bats. I mean, but after he had his medical drama, he ended up going back to work. But he started having nightmares about being in Vietnam. And, they flew at 1,000 feet with no lights on, flying and illuminating targets on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and moving brave men and women from the jungle, landing in short runways and getting up and out. And he was very proud of it. But he started having some intrusive dreams because he went through a pretty stressful time. And here I am as a psychologist, and we're sitting down, and he's like, I just need to work through this. I said, Dad, what you're having is normal. I said, when you were in the military, they called it, combat shock, or, and they would get you out of there as soon as possible, but they would brand you. Mm-hmm. I said, look at the military now. We were standing in Eglin Air Force Base down in Destin to go into the BX, and I had to sign in, and right there on the wall says, protect your wingman. And it was about suicide. I said, Dad, they wouldn't have had this 30 years ago. They would have gotten you out of there so fast. In fact, in MASH, way back when, they made fun of a guy who was trying to go home who was cross-dressing. Mm-hmm. Okay? And, or they would, hysterics. And he actually did very well before he passed away. He died of another complication. But to me, I think, I've worked in VA settings. I think VA settings should be 90% psychiatric and 10% physical medicine and rehabilitation. I think the surgery, the internal medicine, the diabetes care management should go to the private community. Let's pay our private providers to take care of our veterans so they go out in the community. Let's make the VAs the number one freaking psychiatric care center in the world. And let's get them the care that they've earned and that they deserve as humans. And let's have another side that specializes in amputee rehabilitation and shock and traumatic brain injury stuff. And if that starts trickling down, where we start shining a light on the fact that we are all a human breathing organism in this environment, we can lock in the brain, that it's not yell and scream and get yourself up, from your bootstraps. It's, I need help. That's often the bravest thing somebody can do, is say, I need help in my life.
I think that's awesome. And I agree with your take on the VA as well. I think that that would be really powerful. We'd make some lasting changes if we were to be able to make that shift.
Yeah, you probably had no idea we were going in this direction, did you?
Hey, I'm all about it. I'm happy to go in any direction that we can. But I do want to shift to the quick fire questions of the show. Are you ready for that?
Let's do it.
All right. What's the hardest workout you've ever done?
Hardest workout I've ever done that's a good question. It was back when I was doing CrossFit. Murph was brutal, but and I saw on your page you have an affinity for Murph. But it was there was a workout that we did. It was a private one that they did that were honoring a military husband who was killed in Haiti during the earthquake. He was a pilot, and he was there, and the building collapsed on him. That workout was absolutely, at the end of it, it was fireman carries, and it was the worst I've ever done. It was a private workout that we had done.
All right. In your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
Living.
All right. Yeah, that would definitely build.
Live.
All right. If you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Actually, for me, I have always trained on an exercise bike. I just put an assault bike in my office. And the assault bike kicks my total butt every time I'm on it. I like it. But that would be a great thing.
Awesome. All right, man. The question, what is your best advice you have for becoming a better human? And this is 100% open-ended.
Best advice to becoming a better human is to learn. To learn through everything that we do, to take account, don't judge, to learn, to meet with other people. In the book, I lay out 5 people you need to have in your life. And if you have those 5 people in your life, you'll be okay. And so pick up a copy of the book or check me out at themindside.com and you'll see that. We don't learn enough. I really believe the ultimate purpose of life is learning. We grow, we learn, we grow again. We attempt, we struggle, we don't fail, we learn. And the challenge of learning is so that we can do it again. And if we follow that cycle to become a better human, learning is learning about other people. We see somebody we don't agree with or has a different background than us, ask them questions. I was shy when I went to college. We had moved around a ton. I was an only child, so you could probably call a little protected. I went to an all-boys Catholic school in Baton Rouge, kick-ass school. But I was also one of the last guys to mature in my class. I didn't grow until my senior year. I played 1 year of varsity baseball. So I never walked around with this high level of confidence. So even, dating in high school, I just would rather be at the ballpark. It's where I was most comfortable. But when I went to college, my mom said, look, if you're going to fail at LSU unless you learn to talk to people and learn to learn about them. So she taught me some skills on how to talk to people. And all of a sudden, I found that when I started asking people questions and was genuinely interested in learning about them, I found common interests. And when I found common interests, I found connection. And I started growing friendships, lifelong friendships. So I think the best way to be a better human is to learn. Life is a playground, right? We don't always get to play on the apparatus we want to play on. And we sometimes have to wait in line. And sometimes the damn thing is closed. But you got to be prepared to deal with it either way. And the only way you know how to do that is to learn.
All right, Dr. McCabe. I'm sure that the people listening are very interested in learning more about your work and everything that you're doing. So where could they find out more about you and learn about your work?
Yeah, if you go to the Mindside.com, that's TheMindside.com, themindside.com. Everything is there on our website. Our podcast, the book. We're going to be releasing some training videos in the summer months, I think, that look at the way to maximize the moment, which is pretty unlike anybody else in this field. And it's demonstrating some incredible results at every level. In the Mindside, and also follow me on Twitter at Dr. Bhrett McCabe, and that's DrBHRETTMCCABE. And one thing about my Twitter is I'm unfiltered. And I will say what's on my mind, and I don't apologize for it. I may take it down, probably not, but I just sometimes I get on rants that my 20-year-old daughter goes, "Dad, get off Twitter," but it's what I am. It's who I am.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that I link to your book, your Twitter, and your website where everyone can check that out in the show notes. And Dr. McCabe, I really appreciate your time, and thanks for doing this today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.